What's going on, everybody? It's your boy Greg Peters, and for the first time in Car Passion Channel history, we're gonna be working on a 2005 Mazdaspeed Miata. So this is my friend Josh, and this is his 2005 Mazdaspeed Miata. For those of you that don't know, the Mazdaspeed is factory turbocharged, but it's actually kind of weak sauce from the factory. It's only got about 35 more horsepower than a standard NB, and it's also got a handicapped 6,500 RPM redline compared to the 7,000 of a normal naturally aspirated NB. And that 35 horsepower is on a good day. When you start factoring in heat soak, as with all turbo cars, the power starts to come down. And if I have this story right, one day at Streets of Willow, you were running with an NB, non-turbo NB, and on the straights, it was hanging with you in this car.
Yeah, it was NA though.
Oh, it was an NA. So it was an NA 1.8, and it was hanging with a Mazdaspeed on the straights just because of that heat soak. And I mean, they're just pretty detuned. So what we're doing today is we're going to put in an MS Pro plug and play standalone ECU, throw a set of injectors at it, do some street tuning, and see what kind of difference we can make in power just basically through tuning and adding a little fuel and boost. So the first thing I want to do is just install the Megasquirt ECU and start the car up without making any other changes. The injectors, the boost control, all that can be for later. I want to make sure the ECU is functioning properly and all systems are go before we start making tweaks. Now, I've already done a detailed video on how to install Megasquirt. It was on an early 1.6 car, but this install really is not much different. Doing Megasquirt on an NB is actually even easier than doing it on a 1.6 car or an NA. Mazdaspeeds are fancy. The plug and plays are pretty much ready to throw into your car as you buy them, but you can change certain things around depending on your setup, so I just want to make sure everything is as configured from factory before I put it in the car. So all I'm really looking for is to see if any aftermarket jumpers were added on some of these pins, which O2 sensor it's set up to read from, and all this information can be found out in the installation instructions. I have specific installation instructions for an NB linked in the description below. Looks like everything on this board is untouched, so this MS is ready to install. The ECU is super easy to access on these cars. You just come down to your pedal bay, and it's right there. It's got one 10mm nut. And then you just use a small flathead or beast fingers to unplug the stock harness plugs. There you go, so we got the ECU unplugged. Now I just gotta unbolt it. And there she is. So on earlier Miatas, the ECU mounts to the floor, but this mounts between the clutch pedal and the brake pedal using special brackets. And the stock ECU has got threaded holes for those brackets, but the MS does not. So there is one location where a stock bracket would fit. I'm wondering if there's enough space to drill and tap the MS case to take this bracket. That would be a pretty trick mounting solution. There's really nothing directly in there. It's got a lot of space inside, so I'm gonna drill and tap that. This is gonna be sweet. Now the factory screws on the ECU are M5 by 0.8, and in order to get the correct size hole, you need either a number 19 drill bit, a .166 drill bit, a 5/32 drill bit, or a 4.2mm drill bit. Give it a couple marks, a drill in the right spot. That could have gone better, but we'll be okay. Hey Josh, is it okay if I drill holes in your brand new ECU? I mean, I'm no expert, but I'd say that's a pretty solid mounting solution. Just gonna run our vacuum line right here through an existing hole in the firewall and tee that into something that comes off the intake manifold. Okay, we got the Megasquirt vacuum line teed off of the intake manifold. So to be clear, all I've done is plug the factory harness into the Megasquirt, hook the vacuum line up to the intake manifold, and now I've got Tuner Studio open. So the first thing I'm gonna do is create a new project. I'm gonna call this Josh Fast MSM. Detect firmware. Alright, that's good. Picked it up. ECU is working. Accept. Next. Leave everything alone there. Next. No need to change any of that. Next. We can leave all the gauges for now. Finish. Since this came out of another car, it's got an unknown tune in it. I'm going to load a Mazdaspeed Miata base map that I just downloaded. I'll include a link to that down in the description. Looks like the map might be a little older than the firmware that's on this Megasquirt, but will be okay. Let's see if she'll start. Look at that! It starts up like factory, dude. This thing starts up better than mine. Okay, let's crank it to full power. So the only thing that's not working is it's not reading AFR, but that's just because I haven't hooked up the wideband yet. So that's as simple as, on the Mazdaspeed, I don't know. Maybe someone can answer this in the comments. Do Mazdaspeeds have wideband sensors from the factory and the exhaust? Do you even need to install an aftermarket wideband? Because I know a lot of OBD2 cars actually come factory with wideband sensors. So the Megasquirt might be able to use that in place of installing an aftermarket wideband. But we have an aftermarket wideband here already, so we're gonna go ahead and use that and hook the signal wire from that up to the options port on the Megasquirt. Then we'll be able to get an AFR reading. Once I get that working, we'll move on to setting the base timing. All right, I'm starting to get a little more in-depth than I was planning on going in this video, but I know it's gonna be a very commonly asked question: how to hook the wideband up to the Megasquirt. On the options port, it does not list O2 sensor, oxygen sensor anywhere. So I used analog input 2, found out what pin that was, pinned the appropriate port there, and then that wire gets soldered to the 0 to 5 volt output, which on the AEM it's a white wire. If you have an MTXL, it's either yellow or brown, I don't remember, but the instructions will say. So once you do that, you plug in the options port into the back of the MS, go to your fuel settings and AFR ego control, and on your ego port, instead of O2 in, select whatever pin you use, which I used analog in 2, and I'll burn that. And now let's fire the car up and see if it reads AFR correctly. All right, that's what I'm talking about. You want to make sure Megasquirt actually does match your gauge, and if it's off, it's a pretty simple fix. Gonna come up here to Tools, Calibrate AFR table, and as you can see, I've got it set up to read the AEM, but it's got a whole bunch of different widebands in here to choose from. And if yours is not in here, you can use the DIY wideband and set up your different voltages yourself. But pretty much every wideband I've ever seen is in here. And then if you change it, just write to controller and you'll be dialed. Okay, MS is done. We're just on a base map right now, basically. So the car is, it seems like it's gonna be completely drivable. Probably just need to mess with the fuel table a little bit. But another part of installing MS and being able to raise the boost on the Mazdaspeed is it does need bigger than factory injectors. So Josh has some Bosch 440s that I'm gonna install, and we'll get it then running okay on those, and then we'll take it out and start street tuning. I am racing daylight here, so unfortunately some of the pulls are probably gonna have to be at night, but Raul, aka Lint Roller Man from early videos, brought his car over. Raul, can you tell us how to install a Car Passion Channel decal?
Easy. Remove the backing of the sticker. Once you remove the backing, look at that, just like a sticker. You wanna go, I'm gonna use an antenna, basically give me the middle of the one or the back window, line it up.
Line that bad boy right down the center. Look at this professional application right here. This is automatic plus 10 wheel horsepower. That's just for a white decal.
Okay. Look first.
Look at that, boys. If you want to get yourself one, thecarpassionchannel.com/decals. Now to change injectors on a 99 plus engine, you got to take the upper plenum off. And it's pretty simple. You have 7 bolts, 3 on the outside. There's 2 on the inside. Just disconnect all your vacuum lines. Pretty much everything that's hooked up to the upper plenum has to be disconnected. I pulled the throttle body underneath the throttle body, There are 2 more bolts that hold the upper plenum on, and then once everything is disconnected, we're hoping that we can pull it off. You got 3 bolts to remove your fuel rail. That exposes the fuel injectors. There is a whole process to this, relieving the fuel pressure, etc. I do have a video on how to replace your fuel injectors, and I'll link that in the description as well. Out with the old Denso 270s, in with the new Bosch 440s. Now 440 is good for probably roughly 240, 250 wheel horsepower, so this will be plenty of fuel for the stock turbo. There we are, fresh set of 440s ready to go in. This whole upgrade runs about $1,200 for the ECU and maybe $300 or so for the injector, so $1,500, and I think it's pretty much the biggest bang for your buck upgrade that you can do on a Mazdaspeed. You know, probably throw in a catless downpipe is going to help a lot, but I mean, this is really what the car needs to wake up. Another thing to note is the Mazdaspeeds, and I think all NBs, use this quick disconnect fuel fitting type where it does require a special tool to remove it, but you are able to do the injectors without removing that clamp. I just have the rail pulled off to the side and left that thing connected. If your car has a return type fuel system where there's a line on each side, you will have to disconnect it, so just look into what type of fittings you have before you dive into this job and make sure you have the right tools. We out here, pretty much just buttoning everything back up now. We're getting ready to, can you light up the engine please? Thank you. We're getting ready to hopefully crank this thing up on the new injectors and take it out, but we still don't have the EBC solenoid hooked up. Mazdaspeeds have a factory boost control solenoid, but it can't control a boost, so it's pretty useless and it needs a new one. So if I have enough patience, we'll get that installed too. Guys, you know the drill. Anytime you think something is gonna take like an hour, just a lot for it to take like 5, 6. It's getting pretty late, but we're doing well. We got the boost control solenoid wired in. I just gotta hook the vacuum lines up for it, and we're gonna give it a test to make sure it works. So to test it, it's really easy. Just come up to test modes, and we're gonna do this test IO or test 1.0, enable test mode. And high current 2 is what the boost control solenoid hooks up to. Again, you can figure that pin out by the instructions, which are linked below. So I'm gonna go here to high current 2 and hit pulsed. As you can hear, the boost control solenoid is clicking, which means it is wired correctly, and it is ready to turn the boost up to 40 PSI and make 500 wheel horsepower. Make sure you disable test mode when you're done. Before we start it, just gotta set it up for the new injectors, basic load settings, engine, and sequential. To figure out the new rec fuel, just gotta take the current rec fuel of 11.4 divided by the new injector size of 440 times the old injector size of 270, and we're gonna change that to 7.0. Now the car should be able to just start up and drive somewhat decent. Idling dead on the money. So as you can see, that little calculation is super effective, and that is all I had to change. So as you'll notice, it's light out now, and it's also raining. That is because we had a little bit of an issue. The last step before taking the car out for street tuning was setting up the base timing. If you've seen my how to install Megasquirt video, you know that you have to set up your base timing at 10 degrees before you can do any tuning. So we went to do that and found out that the stock pulley on the Miata was slipping. So you'd point the timing light at the pulley and the timing marks would be moving. And they're not supposed to move, they're supposed to be solid. Check out this clip and you'll see what that looks like. So if you put a timing light on your pulley and your timing marks are slowly moving like that, you know you have a slipping pulley and you have to replace it. It's not a very difficult job. You don't have to do the timing belts or anything like that. You just have to take your accessory belts off, and it's a few bolts to swap out that pulley. So now we have a new pulley in the car. We're gonna set the base timing and then take it out and go do some street tuning. And that's what your timing marks are supposed to look like, okay? Now, we're good to go. Alright, so not everyone knows this, but when you install Megasquirt in a car, any kind of car, or any kind of standalone ECU, it might come with a base map on it, but it really does need to be tuned right away. It doesn't necessarily need a dyno tune, but it does need some tweaks. The car might not start, it might not idle right, it might have really bad hesitation. So we're gonna take the car out right now and basically try to make it act weird. Josh is gonna drive, I have the laptop, and I'm gonna try to fix those weird things while he's driving. A lot of it is just attributed to the car's either running way too rich, way too lean, stalling issue, usually just like idle settings and stuff like that. So we're gonna take it out and try to make it nice and drivable and smooth, and then we'll crank up the boost and everyone's gonna be happy. So right now TPS reads -1.4, floor it all the way. 97.6, so it's close. I mean, it's close enough, but we want it to be perfect. Tools, calibrate TPS. Okay, let off the throttle completely. Get current. Now all the way to the floor. Get current. Accept. Okay, now full throttle is 99.8. Zero throttle is 0.2%, so that's obviously closer. So we've taken care of a lot of the boring stuff, like fighting with idle and fighting with engine stalling, like when you come to a stop, and other common things like that. I don't really intend for this to be a tuning video. I know I've kind of mentioned some stuff about tuning, but it's more of just like an overview of the process. You got to get the car to idle. You got to be able to drive it stop sign to stop sign without it dying. Honestly, setting that stuff up is harder than doing the power tuning. Now we're gonna go make some power. So we're gonna do a baseline virtual dyno pull. I did take some ignition timing out of the base map because it seemed to be pretty aggressive, at least to what I've run on my cars. So I want to be like really safe, and we can always bump it up a little bit later, but I don't really do too much with ignition timing on the street. I kind of save that for the dyno. I leave it nice and safe on the street and just make sure the fuel tuning is good and the boost is consistent. So we're gonna start out with just the baseline of the stock Mazdaspeed Miata, do some pulls, make sure the fueling is good, and then we'll start to turn up that boost a little bit at a time and make some power. We're gonna give her a good 2,000 RPM pull. Go ahead and give it the beans. Man. All right, now that we got the AFRs and everything all dialed in, we're doing a couple baseline virtual dyno pulls at minimum boost, which is 6.5 pounds. And we'll go ahead and take a look at those later, but we're gonna turn it up incrementally, probably end up at about 30 pounds of boost on the last pull. So we can make 400 horsepower. So now I'll probably end up at like maybe 12 pounds of boost is a nice safe number. Good bump in power, much better than stock MSM power. Slow down a little bit and give it a good like 5-second pull right here. Fourth is fine. That's good. Playing the song of your people, dude. So we just got back from street tuning. How long were we gone? Like 2 hours? We spent like 30 minutes trying to get it to idle. Super frustrating, but it idles pretty good now. And we ran wastegate pressure for a few pulls, which is like 6.5 pounds, and then incrementally went up. We ended up at about 12.5 pounds, and now we're gonna check out those virtual dynos. And hi, I didn't film an outro, but nonetheless, we are here, and the first pull I want to look at is our baseline run at 8 PSI. Here it is. The Mazdaspeed made 150 wheel horsepower, which is pretty much completely standard for that car. They usually put down between 150 and 155. Their standard NBs usually make between 110 and 115. But with some tuning magic and a little extra fuel and boost, here's where we ended up. We ended up putting down 184 wheel horsepower, which is a 23% bump in power. Honestly, the car feels really good. It feels way better than stock. I'm a little bit bummed we couldn't get closer to that 200 mark, but we had some things working against us. Number one, which I knew going in, the Mazdaspeed turbo is very small. I know people have done over 200 on it, but Josh also still has a stock downpipe and stock catalytic converter on his car, both of which are huge restrictions on that already tiny turbocharger. And here in the beautiful state of California, all we have is 91 octane. So I did make the ignition map really conservative. If we had 93 or 94 like a lot of the other states in the US, we'd be able to throw some more timing at it, and that's probably another 10 wheel horsepower right there. Throw a 2.5-inch downpipe at it and you're probably at 200. But the good thing is, when Josh wants to get deeper into the 200s and upsize that turbo, the groundwork is already laid. He's just got to throw a turbo and a manifold at it, and he's already got the ECU and the fuel, get it retuned, and you're at 250 horsepower or so, which is right around where the rods start to get squishy. Don't want to go too far past that, but that will once again wake the car up even farther. So I hope you guys did enjoy this video, and I hope you learned something. If you are new, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, and I will catch you in the next one. Peace out.